Welcome everybody, and thank you for joining us at today's webinar, co-presented by CCIQ and Westpac. My name is Michael McGregor and I will be facilitating today's webinar on the results of the Westpac Group CCIQ Pulse Survey of Business Conditions. Joining me today will be two presenters. The first is Megan Johns, who is a senior member of the CCIQ advocacy team and has primary responsibility for the quarterly pulse survey analysis as well as key policy areas including red tape, electricity pricing and environment. Our guest presenter today is Robert Phelps, who is the Head of Business Banking, SME and Queensland. Rob is responsible for the business banking and SME segments across Queensland, New South Wales and WA and has responsibility for St George Bank in Queensland. Welcome, Rob.
Thanks, Michael. Look, on behalf of Westpac Group, it is great to be here, and it's great to be a partner of CCIQ with the Pulse Survey, supporting Queensland business, sharing information on market conditions, and to assist Queensland business with planning.
So just to give our listeners an overview of the webinar, it will run for around 25 minutes, where Megan Johns will first introduce the Pulse Survey methodology, give an overview of the results, and this will be followed by a presentation by our guest presenter, Robert, who has just spoken. We will also have a 15-minute Q&A session at the end of the webinar, so we encourage you to send your questions through during the presentation. At the end of the webinar today, you will also receive a copy of the webinar recording and the presentation, so you can keep them on hand for future reference. You can expect an email containing both of these in approximately 2 to 3 days. Just a reminder before we get started about the Q&A session, we really want this presentation to be as interactive as possible, and we welcome your comments and questions both at the end of the presentation and right throughout the presentation, so feel free to send them through if you have any questions that arise or you feel weren't adequately answered in the graphs and Megan's presentation. As we move through the slides, Megan will pause from time to time to invite some questions, so don't hesitate to send a few through. I'll now hand it over to Megan, who will take us through the Pulse results.
Thanks, Michael, and welcome to our listeners today. As a general introduction, overall the December quarter survey results showed that Queensland businesses ended the 2012 year discernibly more optimistic and positive than they had been for most of the past 12 to 18 months. The quotes on the screen are a summary of the general sentiment expressed by businesses who participated in this quarter's survey. Clearly, businesses across the state did see a change over the 3 months of October, November and December last year. But as I'm sure many of you are rightly questioning right now, the survey, which was conducted in the first 2 weeks of January, showed results and sentiment of businesses just prior to the devastating effects of the recent floods and natural disasters. So we acknowledge that for some businesses, the outlook may have certainly changed. However, what I'd like to also highlight is that compared to the 80,000 businesses that were impacted in 2011, when almost every local government area across the state was declared a disaster zone, the 2013 impact is fortunately expected to be somewhat more tempered. In no way is this comforting for those impacted over the past fortnight. However, the actual impact on the broader Queensland business community is anticipated to be significantly less, and this is going to be important in helping areas such as Bundaberg, Burnett or the Western Downs get back on their feet. Furthermore, we're very pleased to see that the state government has been very aggressive in getting on the front foot, highlighting that Queensland is still open for business. CCIQ is quite optimistic that the indirect impacts of the floods, such as the perception that our state is closed both in terms of commerce and tourism, will not occur as it did dramatically in 2011. Just on that note, now I know, Robert, our guest speaker, you had some comments in relation to the floods and natural disasters?
Yeah, thanks, Megan. And look, it will be interesting to see how the results and what the impact is through Q1 for 2013, through once again the devastating impacts of the floods that we've seen in the last couple of weeks. From a Westpac Group perspective, supporting our customers and the business community and families is critical for us. What I am pleased to be able to advise is that last week we donated $100,000 to the Queensland Premier's flood appeal to assist in supporting families, communities and businesses across Queensland.
Thanks, Robert. we move now just to cover quickly over the survey methodology, I wanted to give a quick overview of how we measure and report the survey to help with your understanding and interpretation. The Pulse survey is the largest and most authoritative survey measuring small and medium business conditions of its kind in Queensland. We average about 600 to 800 business participants each quarter. The survey has participants across every region of the state, and as you can see from the graph on the screen, we have quite a comprehensive cross-industry coverage. If we move on to our first data set, we can see that business confidence, we've entered 2013 significantly more optimistic than the average or trend of the past 2 years. As confidence is a vitally needed precursor for investment and employment, 2013 theoretically has the potential to be quite a good year for businesses. Just to quickly explain this in the coming few graphs, the survey uses the Pulse Business Index as well as statistical data to measure and track respondent views. So with reference to the 50 basis point or the solid horizontal line in the middle of the graph, a Pulse Index reading above the 50 indicates that conditions have improved over the quarter. A reading below 50 indicates conditions have deteriorated. A reading roughly on or very close to 50 indicates conditions are about the same or have not changed over the previous quarter. Also, all results presented in the graphs throughout this presentation are seasonally adjusted. So normal seasonal fluctuations such as a traditional Christmas slowdown period or the busy retail tourism season over December are accounted for in these results. Back to this graph specifically, we'll see that the maroon line reflects business confidence in the state economy, which we can see moved above the 50 basis points to 52.3 in December. With the exception of the spike that we saw in this line recorded in March 2012, just after the state election, and which we tend to view as an out-of-trend post-election high, confidence in the state economy had been trending consistently in negative territory throughout 2012. So it's positive to see that we've ended the year with the confidence moving up into the positive area. The blue line measures confidence in the national economy, which we can see has also improved over the December quarter. In fact, it's moved to its highest level since March 2011, as it had been tracking in negative territory for most of the past 12 months or so. With general business conditions, we also saw a positive improvement over the 3 months to December. The index, in fact, now sits at its highest level since March 2010. In this graph, the red line reflects actual business results for the period of October to December, and the blue line reflects business expected outcomes for the coming 3 months. What this tells us is that the majority of businesses also expect a continued improvement in general business conditions over the coming 3 months. As I've previously indicated, these results were collected prior to the full impact of the floods, so we possibly might see a weakening over the coming months. However, we look back at the results from the December quarter 2010, which we saw just prior to the 2011 natural disasters. General business conditions was deeply entrenched in negative territory at that time, so it's fair to say that we're in a better overall position from which to rebuild and recover this time around. Sales and revenue improved marginally over the December quarter, however sitting on the 50 basis point line at the moment. It's consistent with the average sales and revenue outcomes for most of the past 12 months. Thankfully, however, it is not going backwards. It's also positive to see an upturn in the expected sales and revenue outcomes for the coming quarter, which has certainly not been the case for the past 2 consecutive quarters where businesses were expecting further weakening in sales and revenue. On average, profitability has tracked relatively consistently below the 50 basis point level throughout 2012, and December did not prove any exception to this. Whilst at continuing poor levels, this indicator is beginning to creep upwards towards the 50 basis point threshold. I might just add a further comment that profitability does tend to be a bit of a lag indicator. So with some of the previous graphs, such as general business conditions and sales and revenue showing improvements, we are hopeful that businesses might also start to see improvements in their profitability levels. With this in mind, I might just pass over to Robert from the St George Westpac group to see if you've got any comments in relation to these graphs.
Yeah, thanks, Megan. And look, in relation to the data that's come through from the respondents and shown in the graphs, I think this is really pleasing. I mean, the results to December 2012, and importantly, the future outlook for Q1 2013, to me this really actually signals some green shoots towards improved conditions. Ultimately, business appears to be more optimistic coming into 2013, which is fantastic, which reflects that future outlook. Majority of respondents indicating stronger or stable conditions appear evident for 2013, which will lead to continue to drive that optimism within Queensland and nationally. The sales and revenue improvement in forecast for Q1, to me, again, a really positive sign for us across the business community. A couple of drivers in there, and I'll talk a little bit about more of them later as well, but you know, domestic tourism and some of the verbatims that came through from a couple of the tourism operators around more spending locally. I see there's a real adjustment. I call it the Australian dollar adjustment, with more people spending locally with confidence and being able to actually adjust and deal with the higher Aussie dollar, and how spending locally is impacting on that front. The second one is around focus on operations, and you called out the lag around earnings and profitability. And if we look at the last couple of years and the instability and where market conditions have been, businesses are focused on operations and just productivity and efficiency. And with that focus over the last few years, as revenues start to increase and sales increase, that will hopefully flow through to increased earnings and bottom line profitability.
Great, thanks, Robert. So moving on to employment levels, there was little change in employment levels or the employment intentions of employers. Over the December quarter, it's remained fairly stable for much of the past 3 years. Whilst it is sitting just below the 50 midpoint line, generally speaking, the majority of businesses, or 56%, in fact, reported no change to their employment over the 3 months to December. And an equal half of the remaining respondents indicated either stronger employment or weaker employment. And I might just add that the ABS labour force statistics, which were released today, really affirmed this whole positive change coming through the state economy. We saw unemployment rate drop from 6.1% down to 5.5% seasonally adjusted. So certainly a good outcome. Wage pressures have remained fairly consistent also. If we reflect on historical levels prior to 2008, wage pressures are not really currently presenting a significant issue for Queensland businesses. At present, the majority, or 77%, have indicated average wage levels in their businesses are at the same level that they were the previous 3 months. Finally, capital expenditure does unfortunately continue at poor levels. This represents a significant ongoing issue for the Queensland economy. Capital expenditure is considered an indicator of future business growth. Basically, if businesses are confident in the economy and see growth and investment potential on the horizon, then they will start investing in new buildings, plant and equipment. Unfortunately, this just has not been the case virtually since the global financial crisis in 2008, a trend which we believe can only continue for so long before it impacts negatively on the overall economy.
Thanks, Megan. Before we move on, I thought this might be a good time just to remind our listeners to ask any questions and send them through, whether it be about the results or graphs or general economic conditions that they're seeing on the ground. Rob, I might hand it over to you. Do you think that the improved outlook for 2013 will see an improvement in CapEx levels? It's a question that's just come through from one of our listeners.
Yeah, look, thanks, Michael. It's a really good point to call out and a good question to ask. Confidence and optimism are a precursor for investment and employment. And what's interesting, what we've seen out of the survey, we've seen an uplift in sales and revenue in Q4 for 2012 and Q1 for 2013. We've seen the unemployment data that's come through today, and I'll talk a little bit more around what I was going to call out as employment stabilising, unemployment stabilising, but that's a great sign that's coming through. So absolutely, confidence and optimism is a precursor for investment and employment, and hopefully we should actually see that come through on a CapEx basis.
That's a great response. Thanks, Rob. Megan, we might just move on to constraints on business growth as well.
Yeah, sure. Pulse Business Constraints Index measures the level of key impediments on growth, which are ranked in order from critical through to minor or no constraint. The graph on the screen displays the constraints which were rated as the top 10 for Queensland businesses during the December quarter. It is a historic graph which shows the movement in these constraints over the past 2 years. As has been the case for almost 4 years, and which is indicated by the solid red line at the top of the graph, the level of demand and economic activity continues to be the most significant factor impacting on opportunities for business growth. As an ongoing issue, it largely reflects what businesses are reporting as poor consumer confidence and spending levels, as well as reduced international demand due to economic stability and the high Australian dollar. Number 2, we see political and economic stability featuring as a key concern for Queensland businesses. The federal election is now firmly in sight, but businesses still have concern about the effect of federal politics on consumer confidence and the general business operating environment. What we then see is that the remaining 8 of the top 10 issues all reflect various areas of business cost, including business taxes, insurance premiums, red tape compliance, direct and indirect wage costs, and input costs such as electricity. As I mentioned earlier, these costs are what businesses believe are impacting on profitability. When coupled with the fact that general demand and economic activity remain down, businesses simply just can't afford to be paying out more than they have coming in. One of the key advantages across regions. Overall, what the regional analysis really highlights this quarter is how strongly some regional economies are linked to the fortunes and fluctuations of the global resources and mining sector, and we certainly can see a clear picture of a two-speed business environment when we look across the results. Generally, there was a strong improvement in overall business conditions and performance across the majority of Queensland regions over the December quarter. In Brisbane, Sunshine Coast and Gold Coast, businesses have reported positive improvements across many of the indicators. North and Far North Queensland regions in particular saw a strong turnaround. In fact, these 2 regions have firmly cemented themselves amongst the stronger performing regions over the past 2 quarters. Southwest Queensland is also in good stead. Yes, we did see a decline across a number of their indicators, but this has come off what is quite a high peak and are still mostly in growth position. However, those regions with a strong resource sector presence did not enjoy the same economic turnaround. General business conditions, sales and revenue and profitability levels remain comparatively weak across the Central Coast and Central Queensland regions. And it certainly at this point goes without saying that it's not really the news that these regions wanted to hear, particularly because they have been hardest hit by the natural disasters. In terms of the regional analysis, I'm happy to take further specific questions about regions at the end of the presentation in the Q&A session, so please send through any questions you have about the regional outcomes. Finally, we have the hot topic question. For those not familiar with the Pulse survey, each quarter we feature a series of questions about a current topical issue. We have a different hot topic feature question each quarter. This quarter's hot topic question sought the views of businesses in relation to a discussion paper that the Queensland Attorney-General released, which canvassed a proposal to move some businesses back under a state workplace relations system. The idea being that this may relieve businesses of some of the difficulties being experienced under the Fair Work Act. The survey differentiated between businesses who were unincorporated and those who were incorporated under a company structure. Overall, there was a reluctance to undergo yet another change, with a clear majority indicating that they would prefer to remain under a national workplace relations system. However, respondents were also strongly of the view that a number of critical issues with the national system needed to be resolved, including simplification of the modern award process, reform to the unfair dismissal and general protection laws, and greater flexibility in negotiating workplace arrangements. CCIQ are now in the process of preparing a submission to the Attorney-General's consultation paper, which we will reflect feedback and position reflected in this survey. We're also strongly advocating for workplace relations reform as a key business priority in the upcoming federal election. On that note, I'd like to now hand over to Robert from the St George Westpac Group, who's going to provide us with some analysis of the results.
Thanks, Megan. And look, there's four aspects that I'll cover off today. And look, the first one is in relation to mining, investment, global demand, and commodity prices. You called out the two-speed economy in the last couple of years, and that's absolutely been an aspect in relation to Queensland and nationally as well. Natural resources will continue and is continuing to be a strong economic driver for us within Queensland. Although there's certainly a cyclical shift with global demand moderating and costs for ongoing mining as well increasing and prices softening from a commodities perspective. What the strengths are is around the investment of the pipeline investment that supports ongoing strength within that sector. And a big one for me is the link through to global stability and what we've been seeing in recent times with stabilisation within global markets, which I'll talk a little bit about also. The second point is around what I call the Aussie dollar adjustment, and that's been the ongoing impacts on tourism, education and related industries as we've been able to operate through the high Aussie. I see this as a domestic adjustment to the high Aussie dollar, where the Australian public is starting to see more confidence and feel more confident and spending more. And there's been quite a few comments that have come through in the fourth quarter or December quarter results from respondents, and that's obviously flowing into the future outlook as well, with more local spending as confidence continues to build. The third one is then around unemployment, and my initial call out was going to be around future hiring and what we're seeing from a stabilising position with unemployment. But you've already called out, I mean, we've got the unemployment data out today and the improvement that we've seen there. So I think that is an absolute positive. My comment was it was going to be a positive of just seeing the position actually stabilising. To see it improving is even a further strength, and as I said earlier, this is really starting to signify a number of green shoots as we look forward to what is hopefully more optimism into 2013. The fourth point is just around stability of global markets and the impact that that's had on domestic confidence, no doubt in the last few years. What I'd like to call out is that we just had a number of executives that have come back from the 2013 World Economic Forum, and their experience and the mood is a real shift and a big change from the bleak atmosphere that was at that event over 2009, 10 and 2011. Still, there's absolutely still caution globally, but there seems to be this feel around a sense of relief that the worst is behind us, and the so-called tail risks of extreme events that have been significantly reduced.
Thanks, Rob. It certainly seems from what Westpac St George are hearing is quite consistent with the pulse results coming in from CCIQ's members, and it's quite encouraging to see that 2013 is starting in a lot more positive form than 2011 after the initial floods and disasters. I'd like to now hand it over to some of our listeners and give you the opportunity to ask some questions for both Megan and Rob. And we'll try and get to a few of them, and the ones that we don't get to, I'd like to remind you that we'll endeavour to have those up on our website in the coming days. The first one through that we've got, I'll direct this to you, Megan. A listener has said that they're interested to hear our opinion on how much of the continuing press beat up on the bad stories, how that impacts on business confidence, i.e. front page stories on companies that are going under and of natural disasters, etc.
Yeah, Michael, CCIQ, we're very conscious that one of the key factors that's been impacting the overall business environment has been that general business and consumer sentiment. So, we've been certainly focused here on, trying to get a bit of balance back into the messages that are going out to the broader community. Putting a positive spin on the actual outcomes of business is important. We learnt, with reference to the floods, we learnt in 2011 that it was primarily that bad messaging and the incorrect perceptions about the economy and the state of business was what continued to then draw out and prolong the downturn throughout 2011. So I think it's really important to highlight, as we are doing here today, that there's many positives across the economy. There are many businesses that are starting to see return to traditionally better conditions.
Thanks, Megan. I've got another one, Megan, for you actually. We've just had a listener come through asking about the federal election, and I suppose, given that it's a long lead time into the federal election this year, the longest in our history, the listener has asked, will the federal election have an impact on forecasts, and what are CCIQ's preliminary predictions about business confidence in the market?
I'll only comment, I guess, on what comments were actually provided throughout both the December quarter survey and a number of the surveys throughout 2012, is that in the lead up to a federal election, businesses are putting many of their investment decisions temporarily on hold. So, and they're really just awaiting what the outcome might be. I guess in terms of the general outlook, sales and revenues are improving, general business conditions are improving. Hopefully that's a trend that will continue regardless of the build-up to the federal election. And then in terms of the outcome post-election, as we rightly pointed out in the results, profitability is the key factor that's still holding businesses back, and we're looking for commitments from both sides of politics to address some of those cost issues for businesses.
And Rob, you might have a comment about the long lead-in time as well, business confidence.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. I want to add a comment on both of those questions, so I think they're both great. First thing in around the election, this will be really interesting. I mean, this will be one of the longest lead times into an election that we've seen, and historically we know through a lot of our customers and within the business community as well, there is always an element of caution that does come into play as to, what will the policy agenda look like, what would the impacts be. I think this component actually also links into the first question around the comments around media as a whole and what they're sharing about what we're seeing in the broader economy. That's why we're delighted to actually be part of the partnership with CCIQ. So when we get the information like this, of what we're seeing within the business community, what we're seeing from the outlook coming into 2013, what we've seen in unemployment today, what we're hearing out in the global markets and stability, being able to share that with the business community. So I think there's a real onus on making sure that those green shoots that we're seeing and some of those positive signs are getting out to business and being shared across the various media channels.
Thanks for that, Rob. Robert, I'm interested to know also, just in terms of Queensland's place looking to Asia for exports and even servicing their economies, do you have any comments around how Queensland is placed to take advantage of any markets?
Look, I think it's a really good question that's come through. We're so close from a geographic or global perspective. I feel there is a lot of opportunity still there within the business community. The Asian market, we know, has various challenges and has been challenging for business at certain times, but they're big markets, and I think with our location, with the continued growth now that we're starting to see within Queensland, we need to really start to position ourselves more closely to be able to capitalise on that. I see that as an absolute opportunity in the future.
I've got another question that's just come in. Megan, I might direct this to you. What would you estimate to be the lead time between profitability and increasing employment levels?
Sure. Look, employment isn't obviously just dependent on profitability. It's a number of factors come into play. It's about the general business environment and the confidence across the economy. But like we've continued to point out throughout today's presentation, all the foundations seem to be in place for a general upturn and improvement across 2013. Obviously subject to what some of the effects of the floods might be. But all of the indexes work together. So we're quite hopeful that employment will also continue to improve over the coming 12 months also. Rob, do you have any other comments to add to that?
Yeah, look, I will, because it's a great point. I mean, look what we've seen today in relation to the overall unemployment numbers that have come out, and yet we were still looking in December 12 where profitability there was confidence but still not responding at this point in time. So what is the actual lag time frame? That varies. That varies on trading terms, the investment cycle as well. So there are variances there, but by rights, with the future outlook and what's been indicated from the respondents, we should start to see that come through now in Q1 and Q2, which does tie into the optimism that we're actually seeing and hearing from the respondents that have given us feedback under the Pulse survey.
And I might also just add that with disadvantage comes advantage. The state government has made all the right signals to say that they want to fast track the rebuild and recovery efforts, and that in itself will generate some business activity, particularly in those regions that have been hard hit. So again, there's some employment opportunities involved in some of that rebuild.
Thanks, Megan. I'll have to end the Q&A session there for our listeners, but I might just hand it over. Rob, did you have any concluding remarks before we finish up today?
Yeah, look, I do. Thanks, Michael. And look, just what I think is a positive here is just the optimism that is obviously coming through from the respondents, and hopefully we'll see that continue to flow through to 2013. From a Westpac Group perspective, it's great to be a partner of CCIQ and looking to be able to assist and share information to businesses across Queensland with their business planning. In relation to contact, and I'd love anyone that's on the webinar today or has responded that would like to make contact. I'd love the opportunity to be able to talk further, and my contact details are on the slides.
Thanks, Rob. Okay, to our listeners, that wraps it up for today's presentation on the Westpac CCIQ Pulse presentation. Once again, a reminder that you will receive a copy of the presentation within 2 to 3 working days, as well as a copy of the recording. For any other inquiries to CCIQ, please feel free to get in touch with either Nick Behrens, the General Manager of Advocacy, or James Flaherty, the Marketing and Communications Manager. Thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of your day.